A few zombies were wandering outside the house. The elderly man looked helpless and then turned to comfort the children, saying, "Don't be afraid. Your mom and dad will be here to pick you up soon." After giving the children some water, Earl walked to the door. He smiled and gestured for them not to speak, as the zombies outside might hear them. Then he gently closed the curtain, but when Earl turned around, his expression changed drastically. There was no trace of the kindness he had shown earlier. It was as if a gust of wind could knock him over. In reality, Earl had been bitten by zombies when he took the children out last night. Now he felt like he couldn't hold on much longer. He might turn into a zombie soon. To protect the children, Earl knocked over the tables inside the house. He wrapped a hammer in a piece of cloth he had with him and started hitting it. A chisel pierced through the tabletop. After completing this, Earl felt even weaker. He struggled to his feet. The drill was Earl's way of ending his own life. Then Judith came out, having noticed that her grandfather did not look well.
But I did it to protect you.
I can stay here with you. You can't do this.
Alden will take good care of Adam. You're so strong. But now I need you, Judith. You to keep those kids safe from me. You're so brave. And don't come near me again, all right? I don't have much choice. Please.
Judith had tears in her eyes and grabbed his hand. Despite her young age, she was much more mature than children her age. Earl looked at this little one, and her actions warmed his heart. At least he wouldn't be so alone before he died. Judith turned and walked toward the room, respecting her grandfather's decision and vowing to protect her younger siblings. After Judith left, Earl gasped for breath. His condition was now quite dire. His throat seemed to be blocked, and his vision blurred. He knew he couldn't hold on much longer. The children inside had already fallen asleep, exhausted from the night's ordeal. Only Judith stood guard at the door with a long knife. Despite her tender age, she had already learned the meaning of responsibility. When she heard a noise outside, she cautiously stepped out. She found Earl lying on the table, covered in blood. There was a hole in his forehead, and he wouldn't turn into a zombie. But suddenly, Earl grabbed Judith. Half an hour later, Daryl and the others tracked them all the way from the hilltop to here. The kids' footprints disappeared here, so they're probably inside the house. Daryl told the two of them to wait outside. Then he went up to check it out. Then Daryl pulls out his knife and prepares for the possibility that there are zombies inside. The children had seen them through the window earlier and had run out. Jerry and the King's frowning faces finally smiled. The children were all right. Daryl entered cautiously, calling out Judith's name softly. There was no response inside. When he lifted the curtain, he fell silent. Judith sat quietly in the corner, and Earl lay on the ground. Daryl could guess what had happened, but he didn't ask. Instead, he took the weapon from Judith's hand and sat beside her against the wall. Negan had captured Lydia and locked her in a small house. He then returned to the community to claim his reward and share the news with Alpha. Alpha appeared calm on the surface, but her thoughts were in turmoil. Soon, Negan took her to see Lydia. It was clear that Alpha was in a good mood. She appreciated Negan's efficiency and even rewarded him with a kiss. They quickly arrived at the door of the small house. Alpha hurriedly stepped forward, eager to see her daughter. Negan followed behind her, not wanting to disrupt the mother-daughter reunion. Alpha took a deep breath and opened the door, but to her surprise, there was nothing inside except for some scattered belongings. She turned to Negan with confusion, preparing to ask him, but then, Negan slashed Alpha's throat with a knife. Just like Rick had done before, Alpha didn't think Negan would kill her. With her throat cut, she couldn't make a sound. The leader of the Whisperers fell, killed by the hands of this handsome man. An hour later, Negan arrived at a particular location, carrying Alpha's severed head. He swung his hand and the head rolled to a man's feet. Carol was the one needing Negan. Go back a month. Do you remember when Negan killed someone to help Lydia, and the Alexandria Safe Zone Committee decided to execute him? The next day, someone set him free, and that someone was Carol.
Took you long enough.
On that night, Carol secretly obtained the keys and went to the cell where Negan was being held. Negan thought Carol had come to see him beg for his life, so he bluntly stated that no matter what he did, he would not beg for forgiveness. But Carol said, "What if you don't have to die? If you can kill Alpha and bring me her head, not only can you stay alive, but the people here will see you as a hero. They won't hold your past against you anymore. I can guarantee that." Negan was shocked. He had heard people say that Carol was the real tough one, and now he finally believed it. In the end, Negan agreed. He saw it as an opportunity to start fresh within the community. So that night, Carol let Negan go. Carol does look horrible, and I wonder how much of this was planned by her. Carol hung Alpha's severed head at the border as a tribute to her late son's memory. Negan, following Carol, urged her, "Let's get back to Alexandria's safe zone. You promised to help me spread this message."
What took you so damn long?
All right, I held up my end. Now I am asking you to hold up yours. Just walk me through those gates so I can open up a new chapter in the book of Negan.
Doing your dirty work?
I want you to do it fast.
It's done.
What took me so long?
I'm not going back. You're free now, Negan. Do whatever the hell you want. Wait, don't wait, it's up to you.
Negan was dumbfounded. The woman had no sense of morality whatsoever, but there was nothing he could do about it in this situation. At the rendezvous point, Ezekiel and Jerry brought the kids here. Daryl had gone out to search for Lydia. Yumiko and the others also arrived. Jerry looked at Magna with a joyful expression. After all, they had no choice but to leave her in the cave initially, so seeing her alive was truly a great relief. Eugene was naturally getting ready for his date, and then he told them about the radio contact with the outsiders. This raised immediate concerns among the group. Contacting an unknown person outside secretly could be risky. What if that person was a spy? This behavior is likely to bring about the demise of the Hilltop's demise. A barrage of questions left Eugene at a loss for words. However, Ezekiel stood up and said that nobody was smarter than Eugene. If Eugene's instincts told him that this person, Juanita, was trustworthy, then they should trust him. Maybe they could gain new allies. Encouraged by Ezekiel's words, Eugene shared the details of his interactions with Juanita. When the conversation reached an emotional point, Eugene even choked up a bit. He was willing to meet her, even if it turned out to be a trap. He was willing to be a fool in love. No one spoke after that. Perhaps in the post-apocalyptic world, people were lacking in such passionate love. Finally, Yumiko and Ezekiel decided to accompany Eugene. They were willing to trust Eugene's judgment and wanted to bring another ally to the community. On the other hand, after Negan and Carol parted ways, Negan arrived at the house where Lydia had been kept.
Hey, kiddo, sorry, but
Where's Alpha?
Look, whatever Lydia told you.
Where is she?
She is dead. I killed her.
You liar.
I am slowly gonna reach for it. I have something in my pocket. It's not a weapon. I am not lying.
A mask in her head.
Alpha's throat was slit by Negan, and his head was hung on a wooden stake. Beta stared at the familiar head in disbelief, his face filled with shock. The henchman beside them, however, ingratiatingly said,
You are the Alpha now.
This remark only fueled Beta's anger. The man was taken aback, just trying to please Beta, never expecting to upset him. Immediately after, Beta pushes the man forward so that he can properly listen to what Alpha is saying. But what was waiting for the man was another henchman. Seeing this, immediately ran for his life, fearing he might suffer the same fate. In fact, Beta is angry because his relationship with Alpha is not as simple as superior and subordinate. 10 years ago, a woman and her daughter were fleeing for their lives, desperately trying to take shelter in a house, but the door wouldn't budge. A horde of zombies was closing in on them, ready to encircle and devour them. In their moment of despair, the door finally swung open, and the mother and daughter escaped the impending doom. The child was Lydia as a child. They looked into the depths of the passageway, and there stood a tall figure with a black hood over his head. It was Beta. They met at that moment. Beta was tormented by guilt and grief over the loss of his loved ones at the time. Alpha was the one who helped him find solace, inviting him to leave that place of sorrow. Together, they would eventually form the Whisperers. They even adopted the names Alpha and Beta, symbolizing the letters A and B. This is why Beta followed Alpha so devotedly and showed such care for Lydia. But now, with Alpha dead, Beta walked the streets in a daze. The man who had been bitten still followed Beta, not daring to leave his side. Suddenly, a distant zombie was drawn by the man's coughing. Beta stood still with outstretched arms, while the man panicked and rushed forward once again, taking matters into his own hands. But before the man could act, he was impaled through the chest. Beta looked down at the bag in his hand, as if he could hear Alpha guiding him, telling him to enter the building before him. In the pre-apocalyptic world, This must have been a music bar. Now in a state of chaos, several bodies lay desiccated on the floor. Beta made his way to the far end of the room, which was filled with music equipment and even guns on the floor. He went to the wall and there was a concert poster on it. Turns out Beta was a legendary singer before the end times. Half Moon. A concert turned his favorite people into zombies. Since then, Beta never showed his true colors and lived alone in that building until he met Alpha. On the other hand, Carol hanged the head on the stump and left. She was not happy even though she got her revenge. During her quest for revenge, she had hurt many who genuinely cared for her, including Daryl, Connie, Magna, Lydia, and even bore some responsibility for the destruction of the hilltop. As a result, Carol wanted to get away from the crowd and didn't want to cause any more harm to others. But no matter where she went, Alpha's hallucination kept appearing before her, constantly reminding her of the mistakes she had made. At night, Carol was still moving on, looking for a boat along the way, ready to go wherever she could as the ocean drifted by. Coincidentally, in the house she entered, there was a boat stored in the attic. Carol pulls hard, but the loft collapses and crushes her underneath, unconscious. Meanwhile, Beta had calmed down inside the house, staring blankly at his records. At that moment, the bag moved again, as if Alpha was guiding him to look to his left. There was a dusty music player. Beta thought to himself that this must be the purpose behind Alpha's guidance to this place. He quickly located a power source and played one of his records. The music resonated far and wide, drawing a horde of zombies towards the house. Half an hour later, Beta stood on the second floor, with countless zombies gathered below. This sight exhilarated him, even bringing tears to his eyes. Beta believed that Alpha hadn't truly died but was continuously guiding him forward. He would lead the zombie horde to eliminate the remaining two major communities. Meanwhile, Negan, in an effort to prove he had killed Alpha, brought Daryl to the border, but Alpha's head had already been taken by Beta, leaving Negan in a difficult spot. Daryl, not seeing Alpha's head, once again aimed his crossbow at Negan's head. Negan, feeling helpless, said, "Come on, man, think about it. Why would I leave Lydia out in the wilderness if not to lure Alpha away? It was your girlfriend's idea, and we can wait here for Carol to return." However, Daryl remained skeptical. He knew Negan was the kind of person who enjoyed playing mind games. Just then, three whisperers quietly approached them, pointing guns at them. Negan sighed and thought it looked like he was going to die here today. But then,
"We kneel to the new officer."
Daryl said fuck in his mind and didn't even bother to raise his hand. He felt he had been played by this cunning individual once again. Now, the tables had turned. Daryl's hands were bound, and Negan held his life in his hands. The Alpha makes a rule that whoever in the Whisperers kills her becomes the new Alpha. It had initially seemed like a foolish policy, but now her followers took it seriously.
Wait 1 damn minute. Who was most definitely not the Alpha, holding the badass shotgun.
The henchman is stunned. Then he rushes to bring the gun up. Negan gets his hands on that awesome gun, and then he starts talking too much and talking too much. It was like being back in the Savior's time, where he was always in charge of people's lives and deaths. Daryl looked at this man he considered despicable with a disdainful expression. However, with life and death in Negan's hands, he reluctantly knelt down.
I like it a lot. You should probably shoot me.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
With their combined efforts, they quickly dealt with the three Whisperers.
I'm Tommy, asshole.
As the day slowly broke, they now waited for Carol, uncertain when she would return. Negan then spoke from his heart. He said, "From the moment you guys locked me up, I lost everything. I'd been staring out that little window for 7 years, and during that time I've had a breakdown, so much so that I still have a big shadow over me. So when Alpha accepted me, I admit I was drawn to it. The feeling of being valued and respected felt good, but she went too far. I advised her when they attacked the hilltop that talent is a resource in the end times, but what the Alpha wants is to kill everyone, and it's a rule of mine to never kill a child." After a while, Daryl decided it was time to head back to Alexandria's safe zone. Carol was unlikely to return. Negan naturally followed him, now having someone to vouch for him. Meanwhile, Carol had just awakened, but she was immobilized. Coincidentally, a zombie appears at the door, and as soon as the zombie enters, Carol will be eaten. Alpha kept urging Carol to give up and stop harming others. Listening to Alpha's words, it seemed Carol had resigned herself to her fate. she realized she had been causing harm to those around her. Just then, zombies squeezed through a gap and started entering. Carol suddenly snapped out of it. She couldn't die now. Not like this. She had to do something to make amends. With this in mind, Carol exerted all her strength to move the wooden boards off her body, kicking away the zombies in the process. Immediately after, Carol quickly got up and pulled out the knife in her waist, and ruthlessly stabbed it into the zombie's head. After dispatching the zombies, Carol lay on the ground and then addressed Alpha.
It's never too late.
Instead of leaving on her own, Carol returned to the Alexandria safe zone. Carol wants to atone for her sins through her actions later. It was Daryl who opened the door, and in a rare moment neither of them said anything.